Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Museum Munchkins. I'm Mr. Nick, and today we are talking all about Atlas Moths. And so if you want to start off, we're going to start off by singing a song. If you want to stand up on your feet so we can sing a song all about Atlas Moths. Have you ever seen a moth before flying around your house, maybe at night, or flying around your porch light at night? We're going to talk a little bit more about moths wanting to come out at night, but today we're singing all about Atlas moths. And so we're going to sing a song that might sound a little familiar, but this is an Atlas moth song about an Atlas moth laying an egg and what happens to that egg. So we're going to sing it really slowly the first time around so we can maybe learn some hand motions to go along with our song, and then we're going to play it a little bit faster. Are you ready? Great. So here is how this song goes. So the first part of the song goes, first comes an Atlas moth and lays an egg. So we're going to make our hands like this, like a moth, and we're going to flap our wings to come land on a leaf and then fly away. And so our moth is going to come lay an egg, and then out comes a caterpillar with many legs, so that we can make our little caterpillar come out of our egg. Just like that. So we'll have an egg with one hand, and then with our other hand, we'll make a caterpillar hatch out of that egg. Very good. Oh, see the caterpillar spin and spin. So we can spin like this with our fingers, like our caterpillar is spinning around. Or if you get really excited, you could spin with your whole body. We're going to spin and spin. A little cocoon to sleep in. So we'll make a little cocoon like this with our hands, and then we'll sleep like that. Oh, 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 look and see. Oh, 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 look and see. Out of the cocoon, opening like cloth. So we'll open up our cocoon like that with our hands. So we'll have our cocoon, and then we'll open it up. Out comes a pretty Atlas moth. So we'll open up our cocoon and turn our cocoon back into our butterfly. Or back into our moth, not a butterfly, an Atlas moth. All right, so let's try that song all the way through once really slowly. Are you ready? First comes an Atlas moth and lays an egg. So can we make our Atlas moth come lay an egg? Out comes the caterpillar with many legs. Like that, out of our egg. Oh, see the caterpillar spin and spin. A little cocoon to sleep in. So we'll get our cocoon and go to sleep. Oh, 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 look and see. Oh, 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 look and see. Out of the cocoon, opening like cloth. Out comes a pretty Atlas moth. And we have our moth back. All right, let's try it all the way through without stopping. Now let's see if you can do all the motions by yourself. Are you ready? I bet you can. First comes an Atlas moth and lays an egg. Out comes the caterpillar with many legs. Oh, see the caterpillar spin and spin. A little cocoon to sleep in. Oh, 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 look and see. Oh, 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 look and see. Out of the cocoon, opening like cloth. Out comes a pretty Atlas moth. Very good, you guys. That was an excellent job. And now I'm going to put my guitar down so we can talk more about Atlas moths today. So I've got this big board here with lots of moths on it today. But today we are talking all about this moth right here, the Atlas moth, one of the biggest moths in the world. So Atlas moths are actually not found around here in Kenosha. So here I'm going to get my globe so we can see. So here's Kenosha, right here in North America, in the United States. That's where our museum is. But if we wanted to find an atlas moth, we would need to hop on a plane and fly over the Pacific Ocean all the way over here to Asia. So we find atlas moths here in Eastern Asia and Southeast Asia and even Southern Asia, like over here in India. So we find them all throughout here, throughout dry tropical forests. That's where they like to live, and shrublands. They like to live where there's lots of open spaces, but also lots of big trees for them to grow their caterpillars, to lay their eggs, and to grow up in. Now, atlas moths, as you can probably tell from just looking at them like this, atlas moths are one of the largest moths in the world. In fact, they have wingspans about 9.5 to 10 inches. That is a pretty big moth. I don't know if I would want to see a moth that big flying around my porch light at night. And because they're insects, they have a few things in common with all insects. They have 2 antennae. Can you make some antennae with your fingers on your head? Yeah, we can make some antennae. We don't have any antennae because we're not insects. And they have 2 eyes. Can you find your eyes? 1, 2 eyeballs. They have a head and a thorax. That's kind of our chest and tummy area. And an abdomen, which is their bottom. They have 4 wings and they have 6 legs. Can you find your legs? We've only got 1, 2 legs on our bodies, but insects have 6 of them. And since they're a type of moth, they go through a special type of life stage called metamorphosis. So they start off as one thing, and then their bodies completely change as they get older. So butterflies and moths, they start off as a little tiny egg on a leaf. And when that egg hatches, like we did in our song, we had our little egg, and then out of the egg comes a little caterpillar, and that caterpillar then is a baby moth, a baby atlas moth. But those baby atlas moths can get to be about 4.5 to 5 inches long. They're pretty big, prickly-looking caterpillars. And then moths will make a cocoon. So they spin silk. Their body makes silk. And they spin a silk cocoon around themselves to change into adults in. When they have the cocoon, and then when their cocoon opens up, that's when the moth comes out from the inside, and it turns into an adult. So we don't go through a metamorphosis. Our bodies don't change that much as we get older. So we start off as little tiny babies, right? And as we get bigger, our bodies get bigger, and we get stronger, and we learn new things. But we don't grow wings, and we don't look completely different than we did when we were a baby. Maybe we have more hair, or sometimes people have less hair when they get older than they did when they were babies. But we don't go through a metamorphosis as people. And an atlas moth, those antennae, those are really interesting things. So they have long antennae, which are kind of like feathers. That's why I've got these feathers here. So they have a long stalk in the middle, and then lots of little feathery pieces that stick off on the sides of them. And they use their antennae to smell. What do you use to smell? Yeah, we use our noses to smell, but a moth doesn't have a nose. An atlas moth doesn't have a nose. Instead, they have antennae, and that's what they use to smell with. And now you might use your nose if you're doing an activity or a project in another room. Maybe you can smell someone cooking something really delicious for dinner. But atlas moths, they don't use their antennae to smell for delicious food. They use their antennae to smell for other atlas moths so they can find them. Pretty interesting. And atlas moths really love to play pretend. Do you like to play pretend? Maybe you like to pretend that you are an animal, maybe an Atlas moth, or a lion. Could you pretend that you're a lion? Wow, he has some claws, and we have a big mane of hair around our heads, and we can roar. Or maybe you could pretend to be a mouse, so you'd be really small with little tiny hands and a little nose that twitches around, and you can smell around for cheese or something else to eat. Well, Atlas moths like to pretend that they're snakes. Let's take a closer look at our Atlas moth again. Now, can you see how this Atlas moth might pretend to be a snake? Well, if we look really closely at the tip of their wings, you might see a little spot that looks like an eyeball and a long stripe that looks like a mouth. So the tip of their wings kind of look a little bit like the head of a snake. And moths, Atlas moths, use those snake heads on the ends of their wings to protect themselves from predators. If anything happens to get too close, they can wiggle their wings around a little bit like that, so it looks like a couple of snake heads slithering through the trees, through the leaves, and on the bark of the trees. Pretty good, right? Lots of insects will use camouflage like that to protect themselves or pretend that they're something else, to protect themselves from things that might want to eat them. And so even though they have huge wings, those Atlas moths, even though they have huge wings, they're not very good flyers. They're actually kind of clumsy flyers, and they don't spend a lot of their time flying around. They spend most of their time just hanging out on the sides of trees, the girls being really stinky so that the boys can use their long feathery antenna to find them. And you might be wondering, what does an Atlas moth eat? And that's a very good question. When they're caterpillars, when they're little babies, they squiggle around and they eat pretty much all the plants that they can find. They munch on leaves and things, lots of the leaves and things in the rainforest where we find them. But when they grow into adults, they don't eat anything. They just use all of the food and the fat that they've stored up as caterpillars to live their whole lives as adults. So their bodies are really fat when they come out of their cocoons. And they use that energy to fly around. And that, since they can't eat while they're adults, that's why they don't really fly around too much. That's why they like to stay still and conserve their energy. Now, moths are very different than butterflies. I bet you've seen a lot of butterflies before. You might have even seen moths before. But butterflies we see more often because butterflies come out during the day. And butterflies and moths are really similar, but they do have some differences and some easy ways to tell them apart. So, number one, how do we tell a butterfly from a moth? Well, if we look at their antennae, a moth has long, feathery antennae. So their antennae are kind of big and wide and feathery like that. But a butterfly has kind of two little sticks for antennae. So their antennae are just really thin and sticks, and they might have a little ball on the end of them. But the easiest way to tell if a bug or an insect is a moth or a butterfly is how do they hold their wings? So when a butterfly lands, they land with their wings straight up like this. They hold their wings up and together. But when a moth lands, they land with their wings flat and down and out to the sides of their bodies. So some people think that moths are kind of ugly brown, black, white, gray, boring colors, and that butterflies are bright, big, beautiful colors like pinks and oranges and greens and blues. But in fact, we find all those colors in moths too. So our Atlas moth here might look a little pale and not quite so bright and beautiful as it did when it was alive. But this is kind of an old Atlas moth. But if you look at this, what sorts of colors can you see? We can see reds and browns and orange and black and white and even a little pink in Atlas moths. And in fact, I brought a book today to learn a little bit more about Atlas moths and other moths from around the world so we can see just how big and beautiful and diverse moths are too. So this is a book called Not a Butterfly Alphabet Book. And it's by Jerry Pallotta and Shannon Bersani. So this book has a moth for every letter of the alphabet. A is for Atlas moth. Don't even think about calling this creature a butterfly. This is a moth. The Atlas moth is the largest moth in the world. Wingtip to wingtip, this moth can be as wide as this page. So that's kind of what a big, beautiful Atlas moth looks like if we were to find one in the jungle. B is for Bella moth. The word Bella means beautiful. Most people think butterflies are more colorful than moths and have more intricate and interesting wings. It's not true. Moths are spectacular too. C is for cow moth. Butterflies and moths land differently. Most butterflies land with their wings folded up. Moths land with their wings spread out. Cow moth, we want to say one thing. Moo. D is for diamond moth. This moth looks like it belongs in a jet book. It is the same shape as a Delta Dart fighter jet. Moths are insects, and insects have 6 legs. A jet is an aircraft and does not have any legs. It has landing gear instead. E is for emperor moth. My, what lovely fake eyes you have. Since birds, tiny mammals, and small reptiles enjoy eating moths, these pretend eyes are perfect for scaring predators away. But if a predator catches the moth, it usually eats the body and leaves the wings. Gulp. F is for fly moth. Nature is truly amazing. This moth has upper wings that mimic red-eyed flies eating bird poop. Some moths have wing designs that mimic eyes, sticks, and leaves. This moth is also called a mural moth. Can you see here next to it is a red-eyed fly, and can you see how the spots on its wings look just like this fly? That's pretty amazing. G is for green lips moth. While walking through the rainforest, look for the green lips moth. No kissing allowed. The green lips moth could be mistaken for a green leaf. It is also known as a giant silkworm moth. H is for hummingbird moth. It looks like a hummingbird. It flies like a hummingbird. It sounds like a hummingbird. It eats like a hummingbird. Don't be fooled. It's a moth. H could have also been for Hercules moth. Some people think that the Hercules moth is the largest moth on Earth. Others disagree and say that the Atlas moth is the largest. Oh no, we have a controversy. I is for imperial moth. This yellow moth is camouflaged when sitting on a yellow flower. A scientist who collects and studies butterflies and moths is called a lepidopterist. Lepidoptera is a Latin word that means scale wing, because that's how butterflies and moths get the beautiful colors on their wings. They're actually covered with scales. J is for Jersey tiger moth. A Jersey tiger moth has hind wings that are entirely different color than its forewings. This is a moth anatomy lesson. Moths have, do you remember? 2 antennae, 1, 2. This moth has 2 eyes, 1, 2. A head, here's its head. A proboscis, we didn't talk about that. A proboscis is its mouth, this long curly tube that it eats with. A thorax, an abdomen, a pair of forewings, a pair of hind wings, and 6 legs. K is for Kentish glory moth. Sorry, penguins, Moths live on every continent except Antarctica. The Kentish glory moth is found only in Scotland. L is for leopard moth. Leopards aren't the only animals with spots. Another good name for this moth could have been the Dalmatian moth. The long hind wings of the moon moth are similar to those of the Luna moth. When long-tailed moths fly, their tails create vibrations that distract their biggest predators, bats. N is for nutmeg moth. This moth is named after a spice. You could do some research. Are there other moths named after spices or herbs? Is there a parsley moth, a sage moth, rosemary moth, a thyme moth? O is for oakworm moth. Cockroaches, sugar gliders, and skunks are creatures that shy away from the light. Moths are the opposite. They are attracted to the light. Moths will fly toward a lit candle, lantern, or porch light. Want to get rid of moths? Turn off the lights. P is for Pandora sphinx moth. Butterflies usually fly during the day. Moths usually fly at night. The Pandora sphinx moth is most often seen flying at dusk. Q is for Quaker moth. Moths do not have teeth or fangs. They can't bite you, and they don't chew their food. Moths drink with their proboscis, which looks and works like a straw. R is for rosy maple moth. The rosy maple moth looks like a tropical insect, but it is actually found in the East Coast forests of North America. It gets its name from eating mostly maple tree leaves. People enjoy maple flavor too. S is for sheep moth. Butterflies have straight antennae with a bump or a club at the tip. Moths have pointed antennae, and some moths, like these sheephead moths, have feathered antennae. Can you get a closer look at those antennae, how feathery they look? T is for tapestry moth. The tapestry moth is also called the carpet moth. These pesky moths get their name because their larvae feed on carpets, fabric, wool, or even birds' nests. They can ruin clothing and furniture in your house. U is for underwing moth. There is no such thing as a baby moth. When a moth comes out of its cocoon, it is already an adult. It is a baby during the caterpillar stage. V is for Venus moth. This moth is fuzzy. It's a myth that moths are hairy and fuzzy and butterflies are not. Both moths and butterflies can be fuzzy-wuzzy. W is for wasp moth. Moths do not have claws or nails. A moth cannot scratch you, dig a hole, or get a manicure. How do moths defend themselves against predators? Well, they fly erratically and are difficult to catch. This wasp moth's best defense is that it resembles a nasty, stinging wasp, and no one wants to mess with a wasp. X is for Zestia moth. Moths versus butterflies. There are ugly moths and ugly butterflies, and there are beautiful moths and beautiful butterflies. Scientists tell us there are 150,000 different species of moths. There are 20,000 species of butterflies. There are not many moths that begin with the letter X. Y is for yucca moth. What a picky eater. Picky, picky, picky. The yucca moth likes to visit only one type of plant, the yucca. Moths prefer white plants and flowers because they are easier to see at night. And finally, Z is for the zigzag moth. Looking through this book, do you see a moth that might be a good design for a shirt, a coat, pants, or a scarf? Zigzag is a funky pattern to try out in your art class. Another word for zigzag is chevron. Remember, this is not a butterfly alphabet book. There are zillion children's books about butterflies. This is a moth book. The end. There were so many moths in this book with so many different shapes and colors. I wonder how many moths we could find around just our area looking around. Maybe I'll go outside tonight if it's not raining and I'll check for moths. We're going to make some fluttering, flying Atlas moths today. And while we make our craft today, I've got some of your questions here about Atlas moths that we're going to answer. But first, for our activity today, we will need one piece of paper. We'll need some markers to color with. We'll need a pair of scissors and some tape and some popsicle sticks, or you could go outside and you could find some sticks outside to use too if you don't have any popsicle sticks at home. And one of these, a pipe cleaner. So we are going to use those, and maybe I'll use these two feathers too that I brought with me to talk about Atlas moth's antennae. Maybe I'll see if I can find a reason to use those today too in our craft. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by folding our paper in half, just like this. And then we're going to I'm going to use my black marker because it's easier for me to see the lines that I draw than on my paper. And then on one side of my paper, I'm going to draw my moth shape, but I'm only going to draw one half of it. And I'm going to leave a little extra space on my moth like this. I'm going to make a couple lines here, so I leave some extra space there, and then I'm going to draw my wings coming off of that. Now, Atlas moths have those long wings that kind of look like a snake head is on the end of them. So I'm going to draw my big wing, one big wing like that, and then another big wing on the bottom, just like this. I'll hold it a little bit closer so you can see. So I've got the two little lines that are going to make me, give me extra space to connect some things. And then I've got my big Atlas moth wings on the side there. In fact, I'm going to grab my book again. I put it down, but I'm going to grab it again so that I can see, while I'm decorating, I can see all the beautiful colors on the Atlas moth. And while we cut out our paper now, I'm going to cut out this butterfly. And I'm going to leave my paper folded in half so that when I open it up, I will have two halves of my beautiful butterfly. And while we do that, let's answer some questions. So, Ollie would like to know how they eat. That's a good question, Ollie. So, when they're caterpillars, they go around with they have little crunchy mouth parts that are really good at slicing and chewing up the leaves of the plants that they live on. But when they get older, most moths use their long proboscis to eat with, but an Atlas moth, their proboscis actually gets stuck to their body while they're changing into an adult Atlas moth. So they actually can't eat anything. But there's lots of flowers and things in the jungles where they live, so I wonder if they could eat what sorts of things an Atlas moth might like to eat. I wonder. All right, so I cut out my one half here, and now watch when I unfold it, I've got my two Atlas moth wings. Perfect. And now I think I'm going to, just because I like both sides of I want both sides of my butterfly to look the same, I think I'm going to go around on my other wing and make the same line I used to draw my Atlas moth with. I'm going to add that to the other side of my my butterfly, or the other side of my moth too, just so that they match. Both sides will match then. There we go. All right, and now I can start decorating my Atlas moth while we answer some more questions. So if we look closely at the Atlas moth, you notice there are lots and lots of shapes and stripes and colors on this Atlas moth. So you could even quick stop the show right now while you're doing your design so you can see exactly what the Atlas moth looks like, and you can use this picture for reference. So lots of artists use pictures for references while they're making, doing their art, especially artists who draw scientific things, so they make sure they get everything exactly right. I'm going to draw some triangles on here, because this Atlas moth has got some big triangles on its wings. So I'll draw some big triangles. And while we color this, let's answer. Claire, William, and Adeline would love to know, how big was the biggest moth ever? That is a very, very good question. And you know what? I'm not entirely sure how big the biggest moth that has ever been found is. Maybe after the show, I think what I'll do is I'll do a little bit of research. And I'll see if I can find that answer for you. And then I'll let you know. You can check back. I'll let you know what I find out in the comments on this video. Sometimes it's important, and even adults like me have to realize when we don't know the answer to something, and instead of just making something up, so since we're scientists and we're learning about the world around us, we need to if we don't know the answer to something, we need to do some research, do some investigation, and see if we can find the answer when we have questions. That's a good thing for you to do too at home. If you have a question about something, you can do some research. You can look up the answer for something in a book, or see if you can find the answer online, on a website, or maybe you could even watch a show about something that is talking about something you want to learn about. So maybe if you wanted to learn a lot about ducks, you could watch a show all about ducks. All right, and Ollie wants to know how long how long they live as moths. That's a good question, Ollie. So because they're so big and they use so much energy, remember, because they don't eat, because they're so big, Atlas moths usually only live when they come out and they hatch out of their cocoon. They usually only live for about 2 weeks. That's about as long as an Atlas moth can live, which sounds a little sad, but they spend that whole time that they're alive flying around or hanging out on trees, looking for their friends, looking for other Atlas moths. And I think that sounds like a pretty fun way to spend the time that they are around, by looking for their friends. All right, so I'm adding these Atlas moths have lots of fun stripes and colors. I'm adding some red on my Atlas moth right now around these spots on their wings. Like this. I'm going to add some pink on their wings now too, because I see some pink in this picture that I'm using as my reference. So when artists color like this, when they use a reference, we call that scientific illustration. So we're trying to make it look exactly like it does in real life, so that if somebody else were to come across our picture, or were to come across this, and maybe they'd seen our picture before, and then they see the animal in real life out in the wild, they could go, hey, I've seen that picture before. That looks just like an Atlas moth I saw once. Just add a little bit more color here, and I'm making sure that I add the same color on both sides. So Atlas moths have a lot of symmetry. That's when one thing looks the same on one side as it does on the other. So I'm Adding a little bit more symmetry here. I think I'm getting close to being finished with my Atlas Moth. I just need to add some orange. Some orange around the snake head part of my moth. So I want that part to be orange. And I think I'm going to add a little purpley stripe by the eyes and for the mouth of my snake head on the wings. And I think I'm just about done. What do you think? So I've got my Atlas Moth here, and now what I'm going to do is, remember when it was folded in half in the middle? I'm going to fold it back like this, and then I'm going to fold the wings down on both sides, just like this, so that when I'm holding it together like this, I have a little piece folded in the middle. That's why we kept that part folded, or we drew that little part that sticks out like this. And now I can take my pipe cleaner and I'm going to stick it, poke a little hole with one side up through this side to make some feathery antenna. And then I think I'm going to poke it up through this other side like this. Perfect. And now when I bend it together, I can twist my two sides together like this to make two feathery little antennae. And then I've got this little extra handle down here too that's going to help me with my popsicle sticks. So I'm going to take my two popsicle sticks here and put them around the bottom here just like this. So kind of like it's pinching it. And then I'm going to use the rest of my pipe cleaner to kind of wrap around like this. Now, if you don't have a pipe cleaner at home, that's when you could use that tape to hold the popsicle sticks around the middle part of your Atlas Moth like that. And now I've got my Atlas Moth on my popsicle sticks, and I can, if I go up and down, it looks like my Atlas Moth is flying. Like that, so I could make a whole bunch of Atlas moths, or maybe I could make some of my favorite moths I saw in my book, or I could make maybe some butterflies too, the same way that I see out in my garden in my backyard. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today while we talked and learned all about our Atlas moths, and I hope that you join us next week when we're going to learn about some more really interesting animals, the jellyfish. So if you want to learn all about jellyfish, you can join us again next week on Wednesday morning at 9:30. And thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.